Hey everyone, welcome back to Intro to DJing, and in this video what I want to do is talk about gain staging. In other words, setting your volume or setting your gains. Now this can be really confusing because there are three places in which you have control over your gain, actually four if you include the crossfader, so this can be really confusing and overwhelming, but it's important to do this right because if you do it right, you can get the best sound possible. You have complete control over basically the volume, which is perhaps the most important thing that you're controlling as a DJ, of course, besides the music. But if you're playing great music, but the volume's all the way down, no one's going to hear it anyway. And this has huge practical implications too. For instance, I was at an event yesterday and a guy came up to me, he was a band director, and he was basically like, why does your audio sound so much better than the other people playing music and the other DJs we've had? And we were all plugged into the same PA because it was at a basketball stadium. So he was just confused, and I basically told him, no, it's about having proper gain structure and setting all of your levels the right way, because if you're clipping things, if you have distortion, it's going to lower the amount of bass that's put out. You may even destroy speakers. It can cause damage. So once again, really, really important to get the best sound possible. So let's talk about these four areas that you control your volume. The first is your crossfader. So if I'm playing a track here and the crossfader is all the way, if I'm playing a track on deck A and my crossfader is all the way to the right, you're not going to hear the track. As I move the crossfader over, the gain or the volume on track A will go up. The next place you have control over your gain is your up fader. So when it's all the way down, the track is going to be completely silent. And as you increase it, you'll basically increase the gain. Next one is your trim knob, which is usually found on top of your EQ controls. And last but not least, you have your overall master volume here, which of course, if this is all the way down, you're not going to hear any audio either. Of course, I can't demo this for you because I'm routing my audio through my computer so you guys can hear me recording. But trust me when I tell you, if this is all the way down, no one's going to hear anything either. So why are there so many volume knobs? Why are there so many? Well, it has to do with the overall function that each of these serve. And I'll explain to you how I set my gains and why I do it this way and why other DJs may do it slightly differently. So the way to think about it is each volume knob has its own particular purpose. For instance, the crossfader is often used to mix from one track to another. So you wouldn't want to use the crossfader as a gain knob. For instance, you wouldn't want to use this to increase the volume on this deck because then, you wouldn't be able to increase the volume on this deck. Rather, the crossfader is basically used to control the overall levels from their maximum point when you're going from one to the other. Likewise, your up faders can be really good for fading in between from one song to another. And I like setting my up faders in a way where when it is up here, this is the maximum volume that I would want to play the track. This would be like the normal volume. And then anything less is me fading the track in and out. And as a result, if I want to transition from one track to another, I can either have both up faders up and just move the crossfader slowly from one to the other, or I can trade the up faders like this. That's another way you could crossfade the songs. It's just the crossfader kind of does this for you. As you move it from here to here, you're basically keeping the crossfader in the middle and doing something like this. Next up, you have your trim knobs, and these are good because what these allow you to do is control the audio volume of a single deck. So if I'm playing a song on deck A that I know hasn't been mastered, say it's a track of mine that's unreleased, or I haven't sent it for mastering, I want to see how it does, or it's just poorly mastered like some older songs, I may slightly boost the trim or the gain knob here to account for that. Likewise, if it's mastered in a way where it's really, really, really hot, I may decrease the overall volume on this track to slowly kind of make sure it matches well. So these I use as a per deck volume control so that the volume I have is consistent. And lastly, I use this master volume for the overall volume of my system. So what may happen is I may start, once I have these basically set in a particular way, I may start my volume at a certain point. And then as the night goes on, as more and more people come in, let's say to the club, people are going to absorb that sound. There's more energy. You're hitting around 11:30 midnight. I may boost the volume a little bit so it's at its loudest point that I want it. And then once again, once people start leaving, let's say it's towards the end of the night, I may turn it back down a little bit until the night is over. So how do you go about setting your gains? Well, of course, there's no necessarily right way to do it, but the thing you want to avoid is clipping at any stage within your process. Now, depending on what software you're using and depending on what controller you're using, it may be impossible to actually clip the signal internally. For instance, no matter how much I turn this trim knob up, even though I'm seeing a red light here and a red light here in software, sometimes if you just turn the master volume down, you won't actually be clipping the system. But some, for instance, if you're using older CDJs, you can actually do this. You can actually internally clip. And this just has to do with the way the computer is representing audio. So what I recommend to be safe is set these to whatever unity or 0 is in your software. Unfortunately, 0 dB is a weird topic that I don't want to get into. It's actually a very technical topic that has to do with how logs are calculated with reference signals. So that's a whole other can of worms that maybe I'll do another video on. But suffice it to say, generally the best practice is set these to 0, or what I do is I actually set these to -6 dB FS. So dB full scale, which is what's being represented here. If I set these to -6, then I know no matter how loud these how high the upfader is, I will have enough room and I won't be internally clipping anything. Now that may mean I will have to boost my master volume a little bit to account for this. So if this is at -6, then this will probably have to be 6 dB larger than what these are to account for that offset. But this lets me just remember that I'm not going to be clipping anything internally, and then I'm able to use the full range of these crossfaders while playing the song. So this would be the loudest point of this song. If I need a little bit more gain, I may boost this to -3 and play the track there, and then I will likely return it back to -6 when it's done, and I leave the master volume alone unless I want the overall volume of what's coming out of my DJ controller or system to be raised. So that's how I would approach gain staging. One thing to keep in mind is red lights on your controller don't necessarily mean that you're clipping the signal. Now, this is a really interesting topic because basically they'll have these red lights here to let you know you're getting close, but you can actually set what is displayed here. So once again, you could be showing a red light and you may not be clipping. Now, I think in this case I am because the limiter is kicking in. Now, it's important if this is the case, if you are going into the limiter, I would say don't do it. Don't be pressing into the limiter. It's much better to turn your master volume up and turn this down than the other way around, because what's going to happen is if you're running right into the limiter, yes, the average sound is getting louder, but you're distorting the sound, you're removing a lot of bass from the sound. This just has to do with what happens. So it's better instead to set your trim knob in a way where basically you have enough headroom so that you boost your master output, and that's the case. Some DJs, they want it louder and they try to max out everything on their controller and they wonder why everything sounds garbage. No, what's better is set your gains so that you're not clipping anywhere in your signal. Make sure there's no limiting, nothing adjusting the sound, and make sure you have enough gain on your overall system to boost it. Now, sometimes I'll go to events or venues and I'll tell them, I'm like, look, you want me to give you more gain. How about you turn the preamp up and I'll turn myself down? That way I am not clipping the inputs to your mixer, because sometimes this can happen, right? They'll tell me to give them more gain, and I'll do it, but I'll hear that distortion's happening, because even if this is all the way up, if they have their preamp set up in a specific way, it's basically the same as on the controller if I had done something like this, where this is all the way up and then this is turned down. It may be clipping or limiting internally, which is what you don't want it to do. So once again, it's better to be safe than sorry. It's better to set your gains where there's no limiting happening. You're not going to be limiting with your upfaders, because your upfaders will basically go from -infinity to wherever the maximal point is described by this. So you can see if I turn this down, that's controlling the maximal point where the upfader is. So that's why I think the best practice is set your gains, set your trim knobs in a way that you're not clipping. You can then use your upfader in the maximal range and your crossfader to mix between songs, and there you go. And then use your master volume to get the signal as loud as you need it. And if you're plugged into a system and you need more gain, it's better to turn up the volume down the line rather than try to clip the outputs, and then you end up clipping the preamps on the mixer or the speakers that you're trying to plug into. So hopefully this is helpful. I know this is a super deep and a big topic, but if you have any questions, let me know. Put them in the comments, something like that. Once again, I think it's really important. This is one of those things that makes a big difference, especially if you're working with sound professionals and audio technicians and stuff. If you know how to set your gains correctly, people will think you know what you're doing. Or perhaps the other way to say it is, if you are clipping or you don't know how to set your gains and you come into a place like this, people are very quickly going to think you don't know what you're doing, and they're not going to respect you as much. So hopefully this is a good place to get started. Develop your own system. It's better to play around. It's better to know. But once again, try to use your best practices and don't clip anything for the love of God. See ya.